Are you getting a little bored with your lead playing and just playing the same things over and over and don't know how to break out of that rut? Well, this whole Rut Buster series and playlist on my channel is about how you solve that. And today we're going to talk about a few tricks. Welcome to Music with Marky. So normally when I do these rut busters, they're just one concept at a time or one type of riff or thing that you would be doing. Today, this is more of a general concept. And I've touched on it before with something I call the one note solo, which I'll link above, which is probably like my most used one with students of mine when they get stuck. But what I have for you today is another similar idea of addition by subtraction. And that is when you're taking things away from your playing and things that you would normally do and forcing yourself to play in a completely different manner than you otherwise would and seeing what comes out of you and making new music out of it. And so the first of these three concepts is where you don't get to use your first finger at all. You have to play all of your leads with just your second, third, and fourth finger. And man, it's kind of a bear. I've got a little like 16 measure track where I did just that. I'm going to play that track and then I'm going to come back and talk about how I came up with the ideas that I did because of the addition by subtraction. So you can see there that not being able to use my first finger as the anchor like I normally would caused me to kind of slide around a lot, just using one finger at a time. It's very uncomfortable to not have that first finger to go back to, and I'm sure you'll find that when you play on your own. And actually, it's kind of a good exercise to play scales without using your first finger or some limited amount of the scales to build up the strength in those fingers and be doing bends with them, which I didn't really do there. But the main takeaway from this one was that I came up with a theme that I wouldn't have thought of if I had my first finger in play, because I had to do a lot of sliding, and I did that thing where I had the open string involved too, where I'm kind of sliding up, doing that kind of thing. I wouldn't have thought of that if I was playing my normal, had my finger there and I had all the bends and all the things that I normally do and was playing through scales. It got me thinking much more horizontally, and it got me just thinking rhythmically and using an open string as a pedal, just something that worked comfortably without having a first finger available. So there's an example of how taking something away can lead you to an idea that you wouldn't have had before. Now let's talk about the second addition by subtraction, and that is where you're not allowed to play anything on consecutive strings at all, meaning if you're playing here on the fourth string, you can't go to the third string. Can't bend back to it or go to the fifth string. You have to skip a string no matter what you do. Let's look at what I did for that, and then we'll come back and talk about what it led me to think of. So being forced to play notes that were never on consecutive strings led me to open right up with kind of a theme element, bouncing to a string, thinking rhythmically so that I didn't have to, like usually when you're playing on autopilot, you can just kind of go on the melody's flow. Because I wasn't able to do what I normally do and I had to think about always jumping a string, it constrained me to think a little bit more, like I said, thematically and rhythmically. And so I opened up with this little riff here. And that whole idea of cross-picking strings led me to, that kind of stuff where I could stay within what my limited brain was able to think of when I'm skipping strings in kind of the box elements without being boring. And I was jumping around a little bit more too, from position to position so that I wasn't quite so locked in. But having to skip strings and not play anything adjacent definitely was like a tongue twister for the brain, and it forced me into some ideas that I wouldn't have had before, and hopefully it'll do the same for you. Now let's talk about thing number 3, and this one seems a little simple at first, but it's harder than you think, and this is playing a lead where you never even play the root note of whatever scale you're in. Now here you can see I did a lot of playing on one string again. It's kind of easier when you're working horizontally to know where the root note is. In this case, we're in E minor, so this note here, the E, was the root. And I did the melody at first and just kind of slid past it. And then when I started moving into playing more strings, I went back to that kind of cross-picking thing I was doing in the last example because I could stay in the box and I was aware of where the E was and I could stay away from it. So it kind of forced me into a pattern. But the big takeaway from this for me was that ending little riff there where I went up here into what would be the top of the Locrian position where it's starting on G. And I play in there a lot. And there's that E, that root. And I wanted to do a build down. Now normally I would do like a something like that where it's all linear, but I had to avoid that E. So it forced me to play this weird kind of spread out. And I stayed away from the E that entire time. And that whole kind of spread out wide interval lick there wouldn't have happened if I wasn't trying to avoid the root note. So again, addition by subtraction. So there's just 3 quick examples of how you can take something away from your playing and hopefully it forces you into areas that you wouldn't have thought of before. Of course, it makes you uncomfortable, but that's the idea. It's going to force you to play something usually more musical, so you're not just kind of running off notes that you're familiar with. And of course, things that you haven't heard yourself do before, which is what a rut buster is, right? So as always, guys, I hope this made sense to you and you're able to get some mileage out of it and helps you in your own playing. Always, if you got anything cool that happened because of a lesson, share the music with me. I want to hear what you guys are up to. And until next time, keep making great music. Hey friends, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It makes the whole world better.